The Arizona sunset painted the world in shades of copper and gold as James Callahan settled into the weathered rocking chair on his porch. 81 years of living had carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes remained sharp storm gray, flecked with the wisdom of a man who had stared death down more than once. In his calloused hand, a glass of whiskey sat untouched, the amber liquid catching the dying light. Myden Benjamin Hayes Callahan perched on the porch railing, 21 years old, and trying hard not to show his uncertainty. Tomorrow the young man would board a train east, then continue on to officer training before his posting. The Great War had ended 4 years ago, but America still needed capable men to serve. Ben had volunteered seeking purpose the way young men always had. Jamie studied his grandson in the fading light. The boy had his father's build, tall and rangy, but those eyes were pure Eleanor, green as spring grass after a rare desert rain. The same eyes that had looked up at Jamie from a dying woman's face 49 years ago, changing everything. Ben, Jamie's voice rasped like wind through canyon stones. Before you leave tomorrow, I need to tell you about your grandmother. The young man shifted, surprise flickering across his features. His grandfather rarely spoke of the woman who had died 4 years past, claimed by the influenza epidemic that had swept the world. Most of what Ben knew of Eleanor Callahan came from others, their memories painted in soft focus, polished smooth by time and grief. Don't look so worried, son, Jamie continued, his gaze drifting toward the desert darkening beyond the ranch boundaries. This isn't a sad story, or maybe it is and maybe it isn't. Truth is, it's the story of how a lonely cowboy found a reason to keep breathing and how a woman left for dead discovered she had more fight in her than she ever knew. Ben waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. Jamie took a slow breath, then spoke the words that would open the door to the past. The Buzzards were patient that day, Ben. They always are, circling high and slow, knowing that time and the desert sun do their work without fail. But what those birds didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that God had other plans for the woman they were waiting on. The old man's hand tightened on his glass memory, pulling him back across nearly 5 decades. It was July 1873. I was trail boss for the Broken Arrow, thought I'd seen everything this territory could throw at a man. I was wrong. He looked at his grandson, really looked at him, seeing the young man's uncertainty, barely hidden beneath a mask of confidence. You're heading into your own kind of desert tomorrow, son, not sand and sun, but the unknown all the same. And before you go, you need to understand something. The worst moments of your life, the ones that feel like they're going to break you clean in half, those same moments can lead you straight to the best things you'll ever know. Your grandmother taught me that. Now let me tell you how. Jamie closed his eyes and the years fell away. The Arizona sun hung like a weapon in the cloudless sky, each ray a blade cutting into skin already burned raw. 3 days. Eleanor Morgan had counted them in the delirium of dying, marked them by the arc of that merciless sun across the endless blue. 3 days since the world had exploded in gunfire and screaming. 3 days since Marcus Ashford stepped out from behind his mask and showed her what obsession looked like when it curdled into something darker. She lay where she had fallen hours ago, or maybe minutes' time, having lost all meaning somewhere between the second sunrise and now. Her traveling dress, once a fine dove gray that her mother would have approved of, hung in tatters. The fabric had been expensive, purchased with money saved from teaching wages back in Boston. Now it served only as a reminder of how far she had fallen in every sense that mattered. The small canteen that had kept her alive through the first 2 days lay empty beside her outstretched hand. She had rationed carefully, taking only enough to wet her cracked lips to give her swollen tongue some relief. But there were limits to human wisdom, and the desert recognized none of them. The water was gone. Soon she would follow. Above the buzzards wheeled in their patient circles. 6 of them now. She had counted that morning when consciousness still came easy. They knew their business, these birds. They could smell death approaching from miles away, could read the signs in how a body moved or failed to move. They were nature's accountants, tallying debts that all flesh eventually paid. Eleanor's thoughts drifted mercury, quick and impossible to hold. Boston seemed like something from another life, another world. The brownstone where she had grown up, where her father had built his shipping business through hard work and harder bargains. The classroom where she had taught for 3 years, shaping young minds, believing she was making some small difference in the world. The winter that had taken both parents within weeks of each other, consumption eating through their lungs like fire through dry timber. And Marcus, always Marcus. The memory cut through her delirium with sharp clarity. Marcus Ashford, heir to one of Boston's oldest fortunes, a man who wore expensive suits and expensive smiles with equal ease. He had courted her after the funeral had presented himself as a solution to her suddenly precarious situation. A young woman alone in the world needed protection, he said, needed a man to manage her affairs, to take care of what her father had built. She had seen through the polish to the calculation beneath. Marcus did not love her. He loved what she represented. Access to her father's business connections to shipping contracts and warehouse leases that would expand the Ashford empire. When she refused his proposal politely but firmly, something had shifted behind his eyes. The smile had remained, but it no longer reached the rest of his face. "Think carefully, Eleanor," he had said, voice soft but edged with something that made her skin prickle. "A woman alone in this world faces difficulties you cannot imagine. Accept my offer while it stands." She had not accepted. Instead, she had sold the brownstone, liquidated what assets she could, and bought a ticket west. The advertisement for a teaching position in Bentonville, Arkansas, had seemed like Providence. A fresh start, a chance to build something that was entirely her own. Marcus, it turned out, had other ideas about fresh starts. 3 days ago, the stagecoach from Tucson had been making good time across the Arizona territory, dust rising in plumes behind iron-rimmed wheels. 5 passengers in total. Eleanor, a young married couple who barely looked old enough to be traveling alone, an elderly man with kind eyes, and his grandson, 12 years old, and solemn beyond his years. The driver had seen the 3 riders, first had tried to urge the team faster, but the men were already in position, blocking the road at a point where steep rocks made going around impossible. The first gunshot had rung out clean and sharp in the dry air. The driver jerked, clutched at his chest, and toppled from the box. Eleanor would never forget the sound he made hitting the ground, a wet impact that spoke of bones breaking and life leaving. "Everyone out now." That voice. Eleanor had known it instantly, impossible as it seemed. Her blood had turned to ice water in her veins. When she stumbled from the coach on shaking legs, she saw him. Marcus Ashford sat his horse like a man born to it, though she knew he had learned to ride only at expensive eastern stables. A bandana covered the lower half of his face, but she would have known those eyes anywhere. Cold, calculating, fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to run. "Eleanor." He said her name like a prayer or a curse, she could not tell which. "I have traveled so very far to find you." "Marcus." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "What are you doing here? What is this?" He swung down from his horse, leaving the other 2 men to train rifles on the terrified passengers. When he pulled the bandana down, she saw that smile again, the one that did not touch his eyes. "I told you to think carefully," he said, moving toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "I told you what would happen if you ran from me. Did you think I would simply let you go, that I would allow you to throw away what we could build together?" "We have nothing together," Eleanor said, forcing steel into her spine. "I refused your proposal, Marcus. That should have been the end of it." "The end," he laughed, sharp and brittle. "My darling Eleanor, we have barely begun. If I cannot have you willingly, I will have you broken and grateful. And if I cannot have you at all," his hand moved to his belt, to the pistol holstered there, "then no one will." The other passengers were being robbed, systematically stripped of watches and money and anything else of value. When one of Marcus's men reached Eleanor, he grabbed for the cameo locket at her throat. The only thing she had left of her mother, the only physical reminder that she had once been loved without conditions or calculations. "No." Eleanor's hand shot up, closing over the locket. "Please, you can have anything else, but not this, please." The man looked to Marcus, who nodded once. Then his fist came up the butt of his pistol, catching Eleanor across the temple. Pain exploded bright and absolute. The world tilted, then went dark. When consciousness returned, the sun was already high. How long had she been unconscious? An hour more. Her head throbbed with a deep ache that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Blood had dried sticky on the side of her face. She was alone. The stagecoach was gone, vanished along whatever route it had been following. The other passengers had disappeared, whether rescued or also left to die, she had no way of knowing. The driver's body had been moved, or perhaps animals had already claimed it. Only traces of blood in the dust showed where he had fallen. Beside her lay a single small canteen, perhaps a quart of water. A mercy or a cruelty? to die of thirst over days rather than hours. Eleanor had stood then dizzy and sick and chosen a direction. Any direction. She had walked until the sun began to set, then huddled against a rock formation for the night, shivering despite the warmth still radiating from stone. The next day she walked again. The water lasted longer than her strength. Now on the third day she could walk no more. The prayer that formed in her mind was simple. If this is my time, make it quick. But if there's a reason, any reason, to keep fighting, send me a sign. Send help. Send anything. Above, the buzzards continued their vigil, patient as stones. From 2 miles away, Jamie Callahan spotted the birds and knew their meaning the way a man knows his own name. 8 years working this territory had taught him to read the desert like others read books. Buzzards circling in a tight spiral meant something was dying or already dead. The tighter the circle, the closer to the end. These birds were circling very tight. Jamie pulled his dun stallion to a halt, hand moving automatically to shade his eyes for a better view. Could be a deer that had broken a leg in a crevice. Could be a coyote gone old and slow. Could be something worse. His jaw tightened. The stagecoach robbery. He had heard about it 2 days back when word reached the Broken Arrow. 5 passengers, missing driver, killed, the Blackwood brothers, suspected. Robert Hayes had sent men out looking, but the desert was vast and the trail had gone cold fast. Come on, Copper, Jamie urged the stallion forward, breaking into a canter. Let's see what those birds are so interested in. The sun beat down with familiar cruelty as he rode, heat rising in visible waves from the red rock and sand. This was the desert at its most honest, stripped of any pretense of mercy. Things lived here by being tough or being smart, and even then survival was never guaranteed. When Jamie crested the low-rise, his heart gave a single hard thump against his ribs. Not a deer, not a coyote. A woman lay sprawled in the sand below, blonde hair spread out in a fan around her head like some kind of saint's halo in the old paintings. Even from this distance, he could see she was not moving. The torn gray dress, the position of her limbs, everything spoke of a body that had given up the fight. But then, so faint he almost missed it, he saw her chest rise and fall. Alive. Still alive. Jamie did not remember spurring Copper forward, but suddenly he was there, dismounting before the horse had fully stopped, his canteen already in hand. He dropped to his knees beside her, professional calm, warring with something deeper. Something that felt like recognition, even though he had never seen this woman before in his life. Miss, he said, voice rough from a day in the sun. Can you hear me? No response. Her skin was fever hot to the touch, burned red across her face and arms, where the sun had done its work. An ugly bruise discolored her right temple, purple, black and swollen. Someone had hit her, and hit her hard. Jamie slipped one hand behind her head, lifting gently, and brought the canteen to her lips. Come on now, just a little water. That's all I'm asking. Her lips parted by instinct more than awareness. Water trickled into her mouth. She coughed, once a dry, rattling sound, but her throat worked. She was swallowing. That was good. That meant the body still wanted to live, even if the mind had already started letting go. Easy, Jamie murmured, pulling the canteen back. Too much too fast will make you sick. Just small sips. Her eyes fluttered open. Green. The color hit him like a physical thing. Green, like nothing had a right to be in this brown and red landscape. Like spring leaves. Like hope. Angel, the word came out as barely a whisper, her voice destroyed by 3 days screaming in silence. Jamie felt something in his chest crack. No, ma'am, just a cowboy who happened to be riding this way. Name's James Callahan. Folks call me Jamie. Her eyes tried to focus on his face, failed, drifted closed again. Stay with me, Jamie said, more urgency in his voice now. I'm going to get you out of this sun, get you somewhere safe, but I need you to hold on. Can you do that? No answer. She had slipped back under. Jamie worked fast efficiency born of years on the trail. He pulled off his shirt, leaving only the undershirt beneath, and arranged it to shade her face and neck. Then, as carefully as a man might lift something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile, he gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Too light. He could feel her ribs too clearly through the thin fabric of her ruined dress. 3 days without food, probably longer since she had eaten a proper meal. This woman had been dying slowly for a while before the desert got its chance. Jamie settled her across the saddle, then mounted behind her, one arm circling her waist to hold her secure. Her head lolled against his chest, breath shallow but steady. That was good. As long as she kept breathing, there was a chance. "Let's go home, Copper," he said quietly, "and let's not waste any time about it." The stallion, as if sensing the urgency, broke into a smooth canter. Jamie held the woman close, his body sheltering hers from the worst of the sun, and let his mind work through the practicalities ahead. Water first, small amounts frequently to get her system accepting it again. Then food, but light. Broth, maybe? Bread if her stomach could handle it. The head injury worried him. He had seen men take blows like that and never wake up. But she had woken, even if only for a moment. That counted for something. As they rode, Jamie found himself talking to her the way men alone too long will talk to horses or the sky or their own shadows. "You're going to be fine. I've got a cabin about 10 miles from here. Not much to look at, but it's got a roof and a bed and water from a good well. We'll get you sorted out. Then we'll find whoever did this to you and we'll make sure they answer for it." The woman's breath hitched, and for a second, Jamie thought she might be waking again. But she only settled deeper against him, her body trusting in a way her conscious mind probably never would have allowed. By the time Jamie's line shack came into view, the sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon. The small cabin sat alone in a shallow valley, positioned to catch what little breeze the desert offered. It was not much, just one room with the basics, but it was home. The only real home Jamie had known since leaving Missouri 16 years ago. He dismounted carefully, keeping the woman secure, and carried her inside. The cabin smelled of leather and wood smoke, and the wild sage he sometimes burned to keep the mosquitoes at bay. He laid her on his bed, the only bed, and took stock of what needed doing. First, more water. He trickled it between her lips, watched her throat work automatically. Good. Next, he needed to cool her down. Jamie soaked a cloth in the water basin and laid it across her forehead and throat. The skin beneath was hot enough to worry him. Fever maybe on top of everything else. The burns needed treatment. Jamie kept a small jar of aloe mixed with bear grease for just this purpose, desert sunburn being an occupational hazard out here. He applied it carefully to her face and arms, trying not to think too hard about how soft her skin must have been before the desert got hold of it. The dress would have to go, or at least most of it. Jamie hesitated, propriety warring with practicality, then reminded himself he was no stranger to dealing with injured people. Modesty mattered less than survival. He cut away the worst of the damaged fabric, leaving enough for decency, and replaced it with one of his own shirts. It hung on her like a tent, but it was clean and whole. Only then did Jamie let himself really look at her face. Young, maybe late 20s. Pretty, though it was hard to tell under the sunburn and bruising. But it was her face in repose that struck him most. Even unconscious, even half dead, there was something about the set of her jaw that spoke of stubbornness, of a woman who did not give up easy. "Who are you?" Jamie asked the silent room. "And what were you doing out there alone?" As if in answer, her eyes opened again, more focused this time. She looked around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, then her gaze landed on Jamie. Fear flickered across her features. "Easy," he said, holding up both hands. "You're safe. This is my cabin. My name is Jamie Callahan. I found you in the desert. Do you remember?" She stared at him for a long moment, then her body seemed to accept that he meant no harm. She nodded just barely. Her hand moved to her throat, feeling for something that was no longer there. Her face crumpled. "The locket," she whispered. "He took my mother's locket." "Who did?" Jamie asked gently. "Can you tell me what happened?" Tears tracked through the dust on her face. "The stagecoach. 3 men. They stopped us, killed the driver. Took everything." Her voice broke. "I tried to keep the locket. It was all I had left of her. He hit me." Jamie felt anger kindle in his gut, hot and immediate. "The Blackwood brothers." She shook her head, then winced at the movement. "I don't know their names, but the leader, I knew him. From Boston, Marcus Ashford." That brought Jamie up short. "You knew one of the robbers. He courted me back east. After my parents died. I refused him." Her eyes met Jamie's, and he saw shame there mixed with fear. "I think he followed me. I think he planned all of this." "How many passengers?" 5. A young couple, an old man and his grandson. When I woke up, they were gone. Everyone was gone. Jamie's mind raced. 5 passengers, 1 driver dead. The young couple and the elderly pair might have walked in different directions searching for water or help, or they might have already died out there. He would send word to the main ranch, get men out searching, but that was a problem for tomorrow. "What's your name?" he asked. Eleanor Morgan." She paused. "People call me Ellie." "Well, Miss Morgan, or Ellie if you prefer. You're going to be all right, but you need to rest and drink water and give your body time to heal. Think you can do that? I've imposed on you too much already." Jamie nearly smiled. "You haven't imposed at all. Couldn't very well leave you out there to die now." "Could I? What kind of man would that make me?" Ellie studied him with those improbable green eyes, taking his measure, reading him the way he had learned to read the desert. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you for saving my life. Any man would have done the same. But it wasn't any man," she said quietly. "It was you." Their eyes held for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Jamie felt something shift in the air between them, some recognition that went beyond simple gratitude. Then he cleared his throat and stood. "You should try to eat something. I've got stew on the stove. Nothing fancy, but it'll help build your strength back." While he busied himself with the food, Jamie was acutely aware of Ellie watching him. She must be trying to figure out what kind of man she had ended up with. He could not blame her. 3 days ago, her world had been upended by a man she thought she knew. Now she was alone in a cabin with a complete stranger. He brought her a bowl of stew, mostly broth with a few pieces of soft carrot and potato. When her hands shook too badly to hold the spoon, he took it from her without comment and fed her himself small bites, giving her time between each one. That was when she started to cry. Not the loud sobbing of acute grief, but quiet tears that spoke of something breaking loose inside. Jamie set the bowl aside and did the only thing he could think of. He gathered her against his chest, one hand awkwardly patting her back, while she wept into his shirt. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I don't know why I'm crying over stew." "You're not crying over stew," Jamie said, surprised at how gentle his own voice had become. "You're crying because you almost died, and because someone you trusted turned on you, and because you're alone in a strange place with no idea what comes next. Those seem like pretty good reasons to me." That only made her cry harder. Jamie led her, figuring she had earned the right to fall apart if that was what she needed. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm completely alone in the world." She said the words raw with truth. "My parents are dead. I have no siblings. The man I thought was just a persistent suitor is apparently a murderer and a thief. And now I have nothing. No money, no belongings, nothing." "You have your life," Jamie pointed out. "That's not nothing." "But what kind of life? I was supposed to start teaching in Bentonville in 3 weeks. Even if I could get there somehow, all my credentials were in my trunk. My letters of introduction, my teaching materials, everything. Who would hire me now?" Jamie considered this. "First things first. You need to get better. Then we'll figure out the rest. I've already sent word to the main ranch. My boss, Mr. Hayes, he's a fair man. Once he knows what happened, I expect he'll want to help." Ellie nodded, exhaustion settling over her like a visible weight. "I should sleep." "But you should," Jamie agreed. "I'll be right here if you need anything, not going anywhere." As he helped her settle back against the pillows, she caught his hand. "Jamie, yes. Thank you, not just for saving my life, for treating me like a person, not a burden." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're not a burden, Ellie. You're a woman who survived something that would have killed most people. If anything, I'm honored to help." She fell asleep, still holding his hand. Jamie waited until her breathing had evened out into deep sleep before carefully extracting his fingers and moving to sit at the table. He needed to make plans, send riders to search for the other passengers, get word to the law about Marcus Ashford and his gang, make sure Ellie had everything she needed to recover. But underneath all the practical considerations ran a current of something else, something Jamie had not felt in the 16 years since he left Missouri. The sense that his life had just changed direction in a way that could not be undone. He looked at the woman sleeping in his bed, her hair still tangled with sand, her face still red from sun and tears. A complete stranger 12 hours ago. Now she felt like something else entirely. Like a responsibility. Like a promise. like the beginning of something Jamie had long ago stopped believing he deserved. The next 2 days fell into a rhythm. Jamie tended to his duties around the line shack, keeping an eye on the cattle in this section of Broken Arrow Range, while also caring for Ellie. She slept more than she was awake those first 48 hours, her body demanding the rest it needed to heal. When she was awake, they talked. Short conversations at first, just the basic facts. Ellie told him about Boston, about teaching, about parents lost to consumption the previous winter, about the advertisement for a teaching position that had seemed like Providence. Jamie shared his own history in return. The small farm in Missouri, parents dead of influenza when he was 16. The years of drifting, working cattle drives, breaking horses, doing whatever work he could find. Landing at the Broken Arrow 8 years ago and staying because it felt more like home than anywhere else ever had. "So we're both orphans," Ellie observed on the third morning when she was finally strong enough to sit up without help. "Seems that way. Is that why you helped me? Because you understand what it's like to be alone?" Jamie thought about that. "Maybe partly. Mostly I helped you because you needed help and I was there to give it. Don't think it needed to be more complicated than that." But even as he said it, he knew it was not quite true. There had been something else, some instinct that had made him ride faster. When he saw those buzzards, made him care more than professional duty required. He could not have named it then. Maybe he never would be able to name it. Some things existed outside the boundaries of words. On the third day, Ellie felt strong enough to try walking. Jamie was outside fetching water when he heard the thump inside the cabin. He dropped the bucket and ran, finding Ellie on the floor beside the bed, looking embarrassed and frustrated in equal measure. "I was doing fine until my knees decided they had other ideas," she said. Jamie helped her up, noting how much steadier she seemed than even yesterday. "Maybe we start with just standing, work our way up to walking. I'm not an invalid. Never said you were, but you nearly died 3 days ago. Your body needs time." She huffed but accepted his arm for support. They made slow circuits around the cabin, Ellie's strength building with each lap. On the fourth circuit, she noticed the books. "You read?" Surprise colored her voice. Jamie felt heat creep up his neck. "When there's time. Winters are long out here." She pulled a volume from the shelf, examining it with the reverence of someone who loved books. "Tennyson, Whitman, Dickens. You have excellent taste, Mr. Callahan." "Jamie," he corrected automatically. "And they're just stories." "They're never just stories." Ellie ran her fingers along the spine of a well-worn copy of Great Expectations. "They're windows into other worlds, other lives. They let us be more than we are." That sounds like something a teacher would say. Ellie looked up startled. "How did you know I was a teacher?" "You mentioned it that first night when you were feverish, said something about Bentonville and teaching and making a fresh start." She flushed. "I don't remember that. I hope I didn't say anything too embarrassing." "Nothing embarrassing, just that you had dreams same as anyone." They stood there in the small cabin, books between them like a bridge. Jamie realized he had never had a conversation quite like this with anyone. Most of the men he knew measured worth in cattle and horseflesh, in how fast you could rope a steer or break a bronc. This woman measured worth in words and ideas, in the stories people told and the worlds they imagined. It should have felt foreign. Instead, it felt like coming home. That afternoon, the sound of approaching horses broke through their companionable silence. Jamie moved to the window, hand dropping instinctively to the pistol at his hip. But he relaxed when he recognized the riders. "It's Mr. Hayes and the ranch doctor," he told Ellie. "They're here to check on you." Ellie's hands flew to her hair, trying to smooth the tangles. She was wearing one of Jamie's shirts, still having nothing else that was not torn beyond repair. Not exactly how she probably wanted to meet the owner of the ranch that employed her rescuer. Robert Hayes was a man in his mid-50s, silver-haired and commanding in the way of men accustomed to authority. "Doctor." William Porter rode beside him, medical bag already in hand. "Miss Morgan," Hayes said, removing his hat as he entered. "I'm Robert Hayes, owner of the Broken Arrow. This is Dr. Porter. Jamie here sent word about your situation. We came as soon as we could." "You're very kind, sir." "Dr. Porter, if you would examine Miss Morgan, Jamie, and I will step outside." The examination was thorough but gentle. When the doctor finished, he pronounced her healing well. "The head injury could have been far worse. You were fortunate, and Jamie did right by you with the immediate care. The sunburn and dehydration were your biggest dangers, but you're past the worst of it now. How much longer until I can travel? Ellie asked. Another few days at minimum, maybe a week to be safe. When the men returned inside, Hayes got straight to business. Miss Morgan, I've sent riders out looking for the other passengers and your belongings. So far, we've found the old man and his grandson. They made it to a waterhole and were picked up by a freighter. They're safe in Silver Creek now. Relief washed over Ellie's face. And the others, the young couple? Hayes shook his head. No sign yet, but we'll keep looking. My trunk, my belongings. I'm sorry, miss. The Blackwood brothers, or whoever these men were, they took everything of value. We've notified the law, but frankly, they could be in Mexico by now. Ellie nodded, had expected this answer, but still felt the loss. Everything she owned, everything that proved who she was, gone. Hayes continued, which brings me to my next point. Miss Morgan, I would like to extend an invitation for you to stay at the main ranch house once you're well enough to travel. My wife would welcome the company, and it would be more appropriate than keeping you here in Jamie's quarters. I couldn't impose on your hospitality. It's no imposition, it's common decency. And perhaps, while you're with us, we can help you figure out your next steps. I have some connections throughout the territory. Might be we can find you a position closer than Bentonville. Ellie glanced at Jamie, trying to read his expression. He had gone very still, his face carefully neutral. That's very generous, Mr. Hayes. Thank you, I accept. After Hayes and the doctor left, an awkward silence filled the cabin. Jamie busied himself with small tasks, reorganizing things that did not need reorganizing. Your boss seems like a good man, Ellie ventured. The best, Jamie agreed. Been with him 8 years. Worked my way up from ranch hand to trail boss. You don't sound entirely happy about me going to the main house. Jamie paused, surprised she had noticed. It's not that, it's the right thing. You'll be more comfortable there. Mrs. Hayes will be good company for you. But nothing, it's just... He trailed off, struggling with words. I've gotten used to having you here these last few days. It's been different. Different good or different bad? He turned to face her fully. Good. Different good. Ellie felt her pulse quicken. I've enjoyed your company too, Jamie. The air between them seemed to thicken. Jamie took a half step toward her, then caught himself. I should ride to the Widow Miller's place tomorrow. See if she can spare some proper clothes for you. Can't have you meeting Mrs. Hayes in my old shirt. You've already done so much. It's nothing. But they both knew it was not nothing. Every small kindness built on the last, creating something neither of them quite knew how to name. That evening, as the sun painted the desert in shades of orange and red, they sat at the small table sharing a simple meal. Beans and cornbread and coffee, strong enough to strip paint. But it was the best meal Ellie could remember eating, made better by the company. Tell me about Missouri, she said. What was it like growing up there? Jamie set down his coffee cup. Green, that's what I remember most. Everything green and growing. Nothing like here. My folks had a small farm, grew corn and kept some pigs. It was hard work, but good work. The kind that made you sleep sound at night. How old were you when they died? 16. Influenza swept through that winter, took a lot of folks. I buried them in the plot behind the house, packed what I could carry and left. Never went back. Do you miss it? Sometimes. But mostly I miss who I was there. Before I understood how the world could take everything from you in a heartbeat. He looked at her. I expect you understand that better now than you did a week ago. I do, Ellie said quietly. When I was lying out there in the desert, I kept thinking about all the plans I had made, the future I had so carefully mapped out, and I realized none of it mattered. All that planning and saving and preparing, and it came down to whether a cowboy happened to ride past at the right moment. Makes you think about fate, Jamie observed, or providence, or luck. I don't know what to call it. She met his eyes across the table. But I'm grateful for it. For you. Before Jamie could respond, the sound of a horse approaching fast broke the moment. He moved to the window, body tense, until he recognized the rider. It's Jake Matthews, one of the younger hands from the main ranch. The boy who burst through the doors, barely 18, hat in hand, looking between Jamie and Ellie with poorly concealed curiosity. Begging your pardon, ma'am, he said to Ellie. Mr. Callahan, I've got news from Mr. Hayes. The passengers? Ellie asked, half rising from her chair. Yes, ma'am. Like Mr. Hayes said, we found the old man and his grandson. They confirmed there were 5 passengers total, said the young couple headed north following the stage tracks. We're still looking for them. And my belongings. Jake's expression fell. No sign, ma'am. The gang took everything. But there's more. The sheriff in Phoenix has been asking questions. Seems one of the robbers got recognized in Silver Creek trying to sell a lady's cameo locket. Ellie gasped. My mother's locket. The shopkeeper didn't buy it, got suspicious. Man ran before he could be held. But the description matches what folks have been saying about the Blackwood brothers. He hesitated. One more thing. The shopkeeper said the man had an Eastern accent, called himself Marcus. Jamie and Ellie exchanged glances. So Marcus had not disappeared into Mexico. He was still in the territory, still close enough to be a threat. Thank you, Jake, Jamie said. We'll pass this along to the law. Anything else? Just that Mr. Hayes says he'll send a buggy in 3 days to bring Miss Morgan to the main house if she's feeling up to it. After Jake left, Ellie sank back into her chair. He's still out there. But we know who he is now, Jamie pointed out. And the law is looking for him. He can't hide forever. You don't know Marcus. He's cunning. He has money connections. This isn't Boston. Out here, those things matter less than you might think. Ellie wanted to believe him, but fear had its claws in her now. The knowledge that Marcus had followed her this far and would not stop until he got what he wanted or was forced to stop. Jamie must have seen it in her face. He crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. Listen to me. I won't let him hurt you again. That's a promise, Bavamo. You can't promise that. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're strong. I know you survived when most people would have given up. I know you care about books and teaching and making the world better. That's plenty. Ellie reached out, surprising herself, and touched his face. His skin was rough from sun and wind warm under her palm. Why are you doing this? Really, Jamie covered her hand with his own. Because when I found you out there, something changed. I've spent 16 years keeping to myself, not getting close to anyone, not risking anything that mattered. And then I saw you lying there, and I knew if I rode away, if I let those buzzards have you, I would regret it every day for the rest of my life. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. They stayed like that, face to face, hands touching, until Ellie swayed with exhaustion. Jamie helped her to bed, and this time when their eyes met, neither looked away. For a long moment, Ellie thought he might kiss her. For a long moment, she wanted him to. But Jamie took a breath and drew back. Get some rest. Tomorrow's another day. As Ellie drifted towards sleep, she thought about fate and providence and cowboys who read Dickens. She thought about how 3 days ago she had been ready to die, and now she found herself thinking about reasons to live. The desert had tried to kill her. Instead, it had brought her to this cabin, this man, this unexpected possibility of something more than simple survival. Outside, the Buzzards had long since given up their vigil and flown away. They had been patient as they always were, but this time patience had not been enough. The next morning brought Mrs. Catherine Hayes to Jamie's cabin in a buggy driven by one of the ranch hands. She was a handsome woman in her early 50s, with kind eyes that had seen their share of sorrow and survived it. When she entered the small cabin, her gaze swept over Ellie with the practiced assessment of a woman who had nursed her share of sick and injured. My dear child, Catherine said, crossing to where Ellie sat wrapped in one of Jamie's blankets. Robert told me what happened, but seeing you, I can scarcely believe you survived such an ordeal. Ellie stood self-conscious in her borrowed clothes, trying to smooth her still tangled hair. Mrs. Hayes, I'm sorry to meet you under such circumstances. Nonsense, and please call me Catherine. She took Ellie's hands in her own, studying the healing burns. You're a fighter. That's plain to see. Jamie did well by you with the immediate care, but now it's time that we got you properly settled. I've been imposing on Mr. Callahan's hospitality long enough. Catherine's eyes flickered to Jamie, who stood near the door looking uncomfortable. A knowing smile played at her lips. Oh, I doubt Jamie feels imposed upon, but it would be more proper for you to stay at the main house while we sort out your situation. I've prepared a room for you. It was my daughter's. Something in the way Catherine said it made Ellie pause. Was Margaret passed 7 years ago, fever took her, She was about your age. Catherine's voice remained steady, but Ellie heard the weight of old grief beneath it. The room has been empty too long. It would please me to have it occupied again. Ellie felt tears prick her eyes. I would be honored. The journey to the main ranch house took an hour by buggy. Jamie rode alongside on Copper, ostensibly as escort, but Ellie suspected it was more than that. Every time she glanced his way, she found him watching her, as if reassuring himself she was real and whole and still there. The Broken Arrow ranch house rose from the landscape like something out of a dream. 2 stories of stone and timber, solid and permanent, in a way that defied the desert's attempts to scour everything down to dust. Outbuildings clustered around it, corrals and barns and bunkhouses that spoke of prosperity earned through hard work. Catherine showed Ellie to Margaret's room on the second floor. It was beautiful in its simplicity. A wide bed with a patchwork quilt, a wardrobe of dark wood, a small writing desk positioned to catch the morning light. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with volumes that suggested the girl who had lived here had been educated and curious. Take your time settling in, Catherine said. Dinner is at 6. Jamie will be joining us tonight along with a few of the hands and their families. Nothing formal. After Catherine left, Ellie explored the room that would be her temporary home. She opened the wardrobe to find it still full of dresses, all in styles a few years out of date, but of good quality. Catherine had said to make use of anything she needed. Ellie selected a simple dress of blue cotton, pleased to find it fit reasonably well with only minor adjustments needed. She caught sight of herself in the mirror above the washstand and barely recognized the woman looking back. The sunburn had faded to a deep tan. She had lost weight, her cheekbones more prominent than before. But her eyes were different too, harder somehow, older. 3 days in the desert had changed her in ways that went deeper than skin. That evening, Ellie made her way downstairs to find the dining room already filling with people. Ranch hands in their cleanest shirts, wives in practical dresses, children scrubbed and quieted for the occasion. And Jamie standing near the window, looking profoundly uncomfortable in formal clothes. When he saw Ellie, something shifted in his expression. Not just appreciation, though. That was there. Something deeper. Something that made her pulse quicken. Dinner was a lively affair. Robert Hayes presided at the head of the table, telling stories of the early days when the Broken Arrow was barely more than a line shack and a dream. Catherine added her own memories, her voice warm with affection, even when describing hardships. The hands and their families ate with the unself-conscious appetite of people who worked hard and earned their food. Ellie found herself seated between Catherine and the ranch foreman's wife, a practical woman named Sarah, who asked pointed questions about Boston and teaching with genuine interest. Jamie sat across the table, mostly quiet as was his nature, but his eyes found Ellie's more than once. Mr. Callahan not usually much for dinner parties, Sarah observed quietly. Prefers his own company most evenings. Must be special occasion to get him here. Ellie felt heat creep into her cheeks. I'm sure Mr. Hayes asked him to attend. Sarah's knowing smile said she was not fooled. Sure, that must be it. After dinner, Robert drew Ellie aside into his study. The room smelled of leather and tobacco walls lined with ledgers and maps of the territory. Miss Morgan, he began, settling into a chair behind a massive desk. Catherine and I have been discussing your situation. If you still wish to reach Bentonville, we can arrange an escort and provide funds for your journey. You would not be the first person the Broken Arrow has helped after misfortune struck. That's extremely generous, sir. But, Robert continued, if you're open to other possibilities, there may be an alternative. The town council in Silver Creek has been searching for a school teacher for nearly a year. The position comes with a small house and a reasonable salary. Not as grand as what you might have found in Bentonville, but honest work in a growing community. Ellie's heart began to beat faster. Silver Creek, that's the town near here. 20 miles, close enough you wouldn't be isolated far enough to maintain your independence. I've already written to Boston to verify your credentials. Figure it will take some weeks for a reply, but the council is willing to take you on provisionally based on my recommendation. I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide tonight. Think on it. But I wanted you to know the option exists. Ellie nodded, mind spinning. Stay in Arizona territory, near the Broken Arrow, near Jamie. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She found Jamie later standing on the porch watching the sun set in a riot of orange and purple. He did not turn when she approached, but she knew he was aware of her presence. "Mr. Hayes offered me a teaching position," she said, "in Silver Creek." "I heard. What do you think I should do?" Now he did turn gray eyes serious in the fading light. "That's not for me to say. You have to decide what's right for you. But if I asked your opinion—" Jamie was quiet for a long moment. "I think any place would be lucky to have you. I think you're the kind of teacher who changes lives, who makes children believe they can be more than they are. I think Silver Creek would be better for having you there. And if I went to Bentonville instead," his jaw tightened, "then I would wish you well and hope you found everything you were looking for." "That's very diplomatic. I'm trying to do the right thing here, Ellie, not influence you one way or another." She took a step closer. "And what if I don't want you to be diplomatic? What if I want to know what you really think?" Jamie's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You want to know what I really think? I think the idea of you going to Bentonville makes me feel like someone's reaching into my chest and squeezing. I think these last few days with you have been the best I've had in 16 years. I think I found you for a reason, and letting you walk away might be the biggest mistake I ever make." Ellie's breath caught. "Jamie." "But," he continued, voice rough, "I also think you deserve better than a cowboy with nothing to his name but a line shack and a saddle. You deserve someone who can give you the life you planned, someone worthy of you." "And if I think you're worthy—" Before he could answer, Catherine's voice called from inside. "Ellie dear, could you help me with something?" The moment broke. Jamie drew back, that careful distance reimposing itself. "You should go. Mrs. Hayes needs you." Ellie wanted to argue, to push, to make him say more, but Catherine called again, and duty won over desire. She went inside, leaving Jamie alone with the sunset and thoughts he would not speak aloud. The next week settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ellie helped Catherine with household tasks, learning the rhythms of ranch life. She met more of the hands and their families, charmed by children who could benefit from proper schooling. Catherine began teaching her practical skills: how to preserve food for the long winters, how to tend a kitchen garden in the harsh climate, how to make a home in this unforgiving land. Jamie visited every few days, always with some excuse. Business with Robert, checking on the cattle in the near pastures, repairing a fence line close to the main house. But he always found time to speak with Ellie, their conversations growing easier, deeper, more essential. She learned about his work as trail boss, the responsibility of moving hundreds of cattle across dangerous country. He learned about her teaching methods, her belief that education was the key to lifting people out of poverty and ignorance. They discovered shared love's poetry and philosophy, and the idea that a person's worth was measured by their character, not their circumstances. 10 days after Ellie arrived at the ranch, Robert announced at dinner that the Silver Creek Town Council had formally offered her the teaching position, contingent on verification of her credentials from Boston. "They would like you to visit next week," Robert said. "See the school, meet some of the families. Jamie will be going to Silver Creek on ranch business. He can escort you." Ellie's eyes met Jamie's across the table. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, an anticipation, and the weight of a decision not yet made, but feeling increasingly inevitable. The visit to Silver Creek was arranged for the following Tuesday. Jamie arrived at dawn with a buggy, looking freshly shaved and unusually nervous. Ellie wore one of Margaret's better dresses, altered to fit, and tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. The ride took just over 2 hours. They talked of small things, at first the weather and the landscape and the ranch. But as Silver Creek came into view, a cluster of buildings rising from the desert, like determination made solid, the conversation turned more serious. "Are you going to take the position?" Jamie asked. "I think so, if they'll have me." "They'd be fools not to." Ellie glanced at him. "And if I do stay, what happens then? Between us?" Jamie's hands tightened on the reins. "What do you want to happen?" "I want honesty. I want to know if these feelings I have are just gratitude for being saved, or if there's something more. I want to know if you feel it too, or if I'm imagining things." He pulled the buggy to a stop just outside town, turned to face her fully. "You're not imagining things. I feel it. From the start, though, I tried to talk myself out of it. Tried to tell myself it was just the circumstances, the intensity of what happened. But it's more than that. You're more than that. Then why do you keep pulling away?" "Because I'm trying to do right by you. You were vulnerable, hurt. I didn't want to take advantage. I'm not vulnerable anymore, Jamie. I'm choosing this. Choosing you if you'll let me. Before he could respond, a group of riders appeared on the road ahead. 3 men on horseback riding hard toward the ranch road they had just left. Jamie's entire body went tense. Get down, he said quietly. Stay low. What's wrong? Those horses, they're running too hard for pleasure, and they're coming from the direction of the broken arrow. The riders thundered past, and Jamie caught a glimpse of faces he did not recognize. Strangers in this territory where everyone knew everyone. His instincts, honed by years on the trail, screamed warning. We need to get to town, conduct your business, and get back, he said. Something's not right. The meeting with the Silver Creek Town Council went well. 5 men, practical and direct, asked Ellie about her qualifications and teaching philosophy. They showed her the schoolhouse, small but well-built, and the teacher's cottage that came with the position. It was modest, 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was hers if she wanted it. The position is yours, Miss Morgan, the council chairman said. We'll wait to hear from Boston to make it official, but we're satisfied with Mr. Hayes's recommendation. Can you start in 3 weeks? Ellie agreed, her heart full of something that felt like hope. But when she rejoined Jamie, she found him pacing near the buggy, face dark with worry. We need to go. Now. What's happened? Got word from one of Hayes's men. Those riders I saw, they hit the South Pasture camp last night. Shot 2 hands, not fatally, but they're hurt. Took horses and supplies. The Blackwood brothers. Worse. Jamie helped her into the buggy, his movements sharp with urgency. They were asking about you, specifically. Wanted to know where the woman from the stagecoach was staying. Fear, cold and visceral, flooded Ellie's system. Marcus, we're going back to my cabin. It's more defensible than the main house, and they won't know to look for you there yet. Jamie, I can't put you in danger like this. He looked at her then, and she saw something fierce in his eyes. You're not putting me anywhere. I'm choosing this, just like you chose me. Now hold on. The ride back was fast and tense. Jamie pushed the horses harder than was wise, but speed mattered more than caution now. They reached the line shack as the sun began its descent, shadows lengthening across the desert. Jamie helped Ellie down, then immediately began preparing defenses. He checked his rifle, his pistol counted ammunition. Barred the shutters, positioned buckets of water in case of fire. Moved with the efficiency of a man who had thought about scenarios like this planned for them. How long until help comes? Ellie asked, watching him work. I sent word to the main ranch from Silver Creek. Robert will send men at first light, but tonight it's just us. You should have left me in town, gone for help yourself. Jamie crossed to her, cupped her face in his hands. And leave you unprotected. Not a chance, we'll be fine. This cabin has weathered worse than a few outlaws. Ellie wanted to believe him, but she knew Marcus knew the lengths he would go to. He won't stop. Not until he gets what he wants or someone makes him stop. Then I guess someone's going to have to make him stop. They ate a cold dinner as the sun set, neither with much appetite. Jamie positioned himself by the window, watching the desert turn from gold to purple to black. Ellie sat at the table trying to read by lamplight and failing. The words swam before her eyes, meaningless. Around midnight, Jamie stiffened. They're here. Ellie's heart began to hammer. How many? 3 riders, moving slow, cautious. He turned to her. Get behind the stove. If shooting starts, you stay down no matter what you hear. Understand? Jamie, please. Promise me, Ellie. She nodded, throat too tight for words. The voice that came from the darkness was cultured, familiar, hateful. Jamie Callahan. We know you have the woman in there. Send her out and we'll leave you in peace. Jamie said nothing, rifle ready, watching their positions through the narrow gap in the shutters. Come now, cowboy. This doesn't concern you. The lady and I have unfinished business from Boston. No need for you to die over someone else's affair. Still, Jamie held his silence, patient as the desert itself. Then a different voice, rougher, less controlled. Your choice, Callahan. We can do this easy or we can burn you out. Either way, we're getting what we came for. Ellie's hands clenched into fists. This was her fault. Jamie was in danger because of her past, her choices, her refusal to be owned by a man who thought money could buy anything. The third voice froze her blood. Eleanor, I know you're in there, darling. It's Marcus. I've come such a very long way to find you. Surely you can spare a few moments to talk. against her better judgment. Ellie moved closer to the window. Jamie tried to wave her back, but she had to see. Had to confirm what she already knew. There, mounted on a fine horse that looked absurdly out of place in this rough country, sat Marcus Ashford. Even in the moonlight, she recognized the way he held himself, that particular blend of arrogance and entitlement that marked him as surely as a brand. "Marcus," she called, her voice carrying through the shuttered window. "Go away. You have no claim on me. You never did." He laughed, and the sound was wrong edges sharp with something that might have been madness. "No claim, my dear Eleanor. I have invested considerable time, effort, and resources into securing you. That grants me every claim in the world. I'm not property to be secured. You could have been a partner. I offered you that, but you chose to run to embarrass me, to throw my generosity back in my face. So now we do this the hard way." His voice hardened. "Come out, Eleanor. Come willingly, and your cowboy lives. Refuse, and I'll kill him and anyone else who tries to keep you from me." Jamie's response was to fire a shot that kicked up dust 2 feet from Marcus's horse. The animal danced sideways, and Marcus fought to control it. "You have your answer," Jamie called. "Now get off Broken Arrow Land before I put the next one through you instead of past you." The night exploded into gunfire. The three men opened up on the cabin, bullets slamming into wood and stone glass, shattering where it found windows. Jamie returned fire, carefully conserving ammunition, each shot calculated to make them think twice about rushing the door. Ellie crouched behind the stove, hands pressed over her ears, but she could not block out the sounds. The sharp crack of rifles, the heavier boom of pistols, the wet thunk of lead hitting wood. And beneath it all, Marcus's voice, sometimes cajoling, sometimes threatening, always with that edge of wrongness that said he had stepped past some boundary that most men recognized and respected. The siege went on for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes. Jamie moved between windows, never staying in one place long enough to make an easy target. Once he grunted and staggered, and Ellie's heart stopped. "I'm fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Splinter, not a bullet. Stay down." But then Marcus called out again, and this time his voice held a new note. Triumph. "I grow tired of this game, cowboy. You have 10 seconds to send Eleanor out, or we burn the cabin. Your choice, 10-9. "They're bluffing," Jamie said, but his voice held uncertainty. 8, 7. "Jamie, maybe I should go, if it saves your life." "Like hell." He checked his ammunition. Running low. Not enough for a prolonged fight. 6-5. That was when they heard it. The sound of many horses approaching fast from the north. Robert Hayes's voice rang out across the desert, loud and commanding. "Marcus Ashford, you're surrounded. Throw down your weapons." The relief that flooded Jamie's face was almost worth the terror of the last half hour. He glanced at Ellie, managed a tight smile. "Told you help would come." But Marcus, it seemed, was not done. Instead of surrendering, he spurred his horse directly at the cabin, firing wildly, screaming Ellie's name like an incantation that might summon her to him. Jamie stepped out to meet him. The single shot Jamie fired was almost gentle in its precision. Marcus jerked in the saddle, clutched at his side, and toppled from his horse. The animal, freed from its rider's madness, trotted away into the darkness. Robert and a dozen ranch hands surrounded the other two outlaws, who surrendered without further fight. Jamie stood over Marcus, rifle pointed down, face carved from stone. "You should have let her go," Jamie said quietly. "Should have respected her choice and moved on with your life." Marcus, bleeding but conscious, laughed bitterly. "Move on. I loved her. I loved her more than anything, and she threw it away. For what? For you, a cowboy with nothing to offer her but dirt and dust." "I offered her something you never could," Jamie said. "Freedom to choose. Respect for who she is, not what she represents. That's the difference between you and me, Ashford. You wanted to own her. I just want her to be happy." Ellie had emerged from the cabin, Catherine right behind her. The older woman must have ridden with the men, worried for both Jamie and Ellie. Now she wrapped a blanket around Ellie's shoulders while Dr. Porter saw to Marcus's wound. "He'll live," the doctor pronounced. "Long enough to stand trial anyway." Robert approached, face grim in the lamplight. "Miss Morgan, I'm sorry. We should have found them sooner." "It's not your fault," Ellie managed. "Thank you for coming." Jamie sent word from Silver Creek. "We rode through the night." He looked at Jamie, at the torn sleeve where splinters had raked his arm, at the way he stood between Ellie and the wounded Marcus, like a wall made flesh. You did good, son. Real good. As they loaded Marcus and his companions onto horses for the ride to Silver Creek, in the law, Ellie found herself shaking. Not from fear anymore, but from the enormity of what had almost happened. How close she had come to losing Jamie. How close he had come to losing his life defending hers. Jamie saw it cross to her, pulled her against his chest. She went without hesitation, pressing her face into his shirt, breathing in the smell of gunpowder and sweat, and the indefinable scent that was just him. "It's over," he said into her hair. "He can't hurt you anymore. You were shot at. You could have died. But I didn't. We're both fine. That's what matters." Robert cleared his throat. "We should get back to the ranch. Dawn's not far off and Catherine will have been worrying." The ride back was made in near silence, exhaustion settling over all of them. But when they reached the Broken Arrow, Catherine had hot coffee and food waiting. She took one look at Ellie and Jamie still close enough to touch and smiled. "Well," she said, "I suppose after a night like that some things become clearer." Ellie felt herself flush. "Mrs. Hayes, I—" "Hush, dear. You don't owe me explanations. But I will say this. I've never seen Jamie look at anyone the way he looks at you. And I've never seen you smile the way you do when he's near. Sometimes the heart knows what the head takes time to figure out." Over the next few days, news came in pieces. Marcus Ashford and his two companions were locked up in Silver Creek awaiting trial. The young couple from the stagecoach had been found alive but weak rescued by a passing freight wagon. The driver's murder, the robberies, the attempted attacks, all of it would be laid at Marcus's feet. Letters arrived from Boston confirming Ellie's credentials. The town council sent word that the teaching position was officially hers to start in 2 weeks if she was ready. Ellie accepted. 1 week later, Jamie found her in the kitchen garden behind the main house picking tomatoes in the late afternoon sun. He had cleaned up since the siege, the splinter wounds on his arm healing cleanly. He looked almost nervous, which on Jamie was strange enough to make Ellie smile. "Something on your mind, Mr. Callahan?" "As a matter of fact, yes." He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "I've been doing some thinking." "That sounds dangerous." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "I've spent most of my adult life alone, Ellie. Told myself I preferred it that way. Safer, simpler, no one to lose, no one to disappoint. And then I found you dying in the desert, and everything changed." Ellie set down the basket of tomatoes, gave him her full attention. "These last few weeks," Jamie continued, "getting to know you, watching you heal and grow stronger, and start to build a new life here, it's made me realize something. I don't want to be alone anymore. But more than that, I don't want to be without you." Her heart began to beat faster. "Jamie, let me finish. I know it's fast. People will say we're crazy that we barely know each other. But I think sometimes you just know. You know when something's right, when someone's right. And you're right, Ellie. For me, you're right." He reached for her hands, held them in his calloused palms. "Marry me. Not next year or in 6 months when it seems more respectable. Marry me now before you start teaching. Build this life with me. Let me spend every day trying to deserve you." Ellie felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "You already deserve me. You saved my life. You saved mine right back. Made me remember what it feels like to want something, to fight for something beyond just the next day's work." "Yes. Yes." Hope lit his face like sunrise. "Yes, Jamie Callahan. I'll marry you. I'll build a life with you. I'll teach you that you deserve every good thing that comes your way, even if it takes the rest of our lives." He kissed her there in the kitchen garden, with the Arizona sun painting everything gold. It was not their first kiss, but it felt like a beginning, the start of something that would outlast them both. From the house, Catherine watched through the window and smiled. Robert came to stand beside her, following her gaze. "Well," he said, "I suppose we'll be hosting a wedding soon." "About time," Catherine replied. "I was beginning to think those two would dance around each other forever. Think they'll be happy. I think they'll work at it every day and succeed more often than they fail. That's about as much as anyone can ask for." Robert nodded, then his expression grew serious. "There's one more thing. The trial. Marcus Ashford's family has hired expensive lawyers from back east. They're claiming temporary insanity driven mad by heartbreak. going to try to make Ellie out to be the villain in all this. Catherine's face hardened. That poor girl has been through enough. I know, but she'll have to testify. Face him in court. It won't be easy. She's strong, stronger than she knows. And she won't be alone. Jamie will be there, and so will we. In the garden, Jamie and Ellie stood close, foreheads touching, making promises in low voices. The buzzards that had once circled Ellie in the desert were long gone, patient vigil, abandoned. They had been wrong about their prize. Death had seemed certain that day under the merciless sun. But life, it turned out, had other plans. Plans that included a lonely cowboy, a desperate rescue, and love that bloomed in the harshest soil. Plans that proved sometimes the path to everything you never knew you wanted began with 3 days dying and a stranger who refused to let the desert win. The trial would come. Challenges would arise. But standing there in the golden light, Jamie and Ellie knew they would face it together. And that made all the difference. 3 weeks after the siege at Jamie's cabin, Ellie found herself on a stagecoach heading to Phoenix. This time, armed guards rode alongside, courtesy of Robert Hayes, who sat across from her reading through legal documents. Catherine sat beside Ellie, holding her hand when the young woman's nerves threatened to overwhelm her. And Jamie rode his horse just outside the coach window, never more than a few yards away, his presence a constant reassurance. The trial of Marcus Ashford had become something of a sensation in the territory. A wealthy Boston heir turned outlaw, obsessed with a woman who had refused him, willing to kill to possess her. Newspapers from as far as San Francisco had sent reporters. The courtroom would be packed. Phoenix rose from the desert like ambition made solid buildings of adobe and stone streets, busy with freight wagons and riders, and people chasing their fortunes in this new land. They took rooms at a modest hotel, 2 adjoining suites. Robert made it clear that propriety mattered especially now, with so many eyes watching. The defense will try to paint you as a temptress who drove Marcus mad, Robert explained over dinner the night before the trial. They'll question your morals, your choices, everything. You need to stay calm, answer truthfully, and don't let them provoke you. Ellie nodded, appetite gone. Jamie sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. That simple contact gave her strength. The courthouse was indeed packed when they arrived the next morning. Ellie wore one of Margaret's more conservative dresses, dark blue with a high collar, her hair pulled back severely. She wanted to look like what she was, a respectable teacher, not the scarlet woman Marcus's lawyers would try to make her. Judge William Bradford presided, a man in his 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. The prosecutor was a territorial attorney named Harrison, competent, but clearly outmatched by the 2 expensive Boston lawyers who represented Marcus. The first day was dedicated to establishing facts. The stagecoach driver's murder, testified to by the old man and his grandson who had survived. The robbery, the abandonment of passengers in the desert. Dr. Porter testified about Ellie's condition when he first examined her, the severity of her injuries, how close she had come to death. Marcus sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking nothing like the wild-eyed man who had laid siege to a cabin. He appeared calm, even sympathetic, occasionally shaking his head sadly, as if he could not quite believe he was accused of such things. The second day they called Ellie to testify. She walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like water, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then she sat, folded her hands in her lap to hide their shaking, and looked directly at Prosecutor Harrison. His questions were gentle, leading her through her history with Marcus, the courtship after her parents died, his proposal, her refusal, the threats that followed. "And what exactly did Mr. Ashford say when you refused his proposal?" Harrison asked. Ellie's voice remained steady. "He said I should think carefully, that a woman alone in the world faced difficulties I could not imagine. He said I should accept his offer while it still stood." "Did you feel threatened?" "Yes, it was not what he said so much as how he said it. There was something in his eyes that frightened me." "What did you do?" "I sold my parents' home, liquidated their business holdings, and purchased a ticket west. I thought distance would be enough. But it was not. No, he followed me, organized the robbery specifically because I was on that stagecoach." The defense attorney, a sharp-faced man named Whitmore, objected. "Speculation, Your Honor. The witness cannot know Mr. Ashford's motivations." "Sustained," Judge Bradford ruled. "Miss Morgan, please limit your testimony to what you directly observed." The questioning continued, Harrison building a picture of obsession turned deadly. Then it was the defense's turn. Whitmore approached with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Miss Morgan, you say my client courted you in Boston. Did you accept gifts from him during this courtship? Small gifts, flowers, a book of poetry, nothing inappropriate. Did you attend social functions with him? Dinners, theater performances, charity events? A few times, yes, always properly chaperoned. So you did encourage his attentions, at least initially. I was polite to an acquaintance. That is not the same as encouragement. But you can see how a man might misinterpret politeness as interest. Ellie's jaw tightened. A reasonable man accepts no for an answer, Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Ashford is many things, but reasonable is not among them. Whitmore's expression hardened. Miss Morgan, is it true you are now engaged to another man? I am. How long after refusing my client did this engagement occur? Several months. And this man, Mr. James Callahan, he is the one who found you in the desert, is he not? Yes, Whitmore turned to face the jury, voice dripping with insinuation. How convenient. A rich suitor in Boston is not good enough, but a cowboy who rescues you becomes your intended. One might wonder if there was not some prior arrangement. The courtroom erupted. Jamie half rose from his seat, face dark with fury. Judge Bradford's gavel cracked like thunder. Mr. Whitmore, you will confine yourself to relevant questions, or I will hold you in contempt. But the seed had been planted, and Whitmore knew it. He smiled. No further questions, Your Honor. Ellie returned to her seat, feeling sick. Jamie's hand found hers under the table, squeezed hard. He's trying to rattle you, Robert whispered. Don't let him. The defense's case rested on the claim of temporary insanity. They called doctors who had never examined Marcus, but were willing to testify that obsessive love could drive a man to irrational acts. They painted him as a victim of his own passionate nature, driven mad by Ellie's rejection. When Marcus took the stand, he played his part perfectly. Contrite, broken, a man who had made terrible mistakes in the grip of emotions he could not control. I loved her, he said, voice trembling, more than I have ever loved anything in this world. When she left, when she threw my love back in my face, something inside me broke. I was not in my right mind. I see that now. The things I did, they horrify me. But I was not myself. It was a masterful performance. Ellie could see some of the jurors nodding sympathy on their faces. Prosecutor Harrison's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Ashford, you claim you were not in your right mind. Yet you managed to recruit 2 accomplices, plan multiple robberies, track Miss Morgan across half the country. These seem like the actions of a calculating man, not a madman. Marcus's mask slipped for just a moment, something cold showing through. Love makes men do things they would not otherwise consider. Love you call murder love, you call leaving 5 people to die in the desert love. I never meant for the driver to do. He reached for a weapon, my companion panicked, and leaving the passengers without water or supplies. What would you call that? A mistake, a terrible mistake made in the heat of passion. Harrison produced a letter, then one that made Marcus's face go pale. This is a letter you sent to Miss Morgan before she left Boston. Would you like me to read it to the court? Marcus said nothing. Harrison read anyway. If I can have you, I will make certain no one can. You will regret refusing me, Eleanor. I will follow you to the ends of the earth. There is nowhere you can run that I will not find you. He looked up. Does this sound like the heat of passion, Mr. Ashford? Or does it sound like premeditated obsession? I was upset when I wrote that. You were threatening. There is a difference. Harrison paced before the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a story of love gone wrong. This is a story of a man who believed his wealth entitled him to possess another human being. When that possession was denied, he chose violence. Calculated, deliberate violence. That is not insanity. That is evil. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of the stagecoach driver. Attempted murder of the passengers left to die. Armed robbery. Assault with intent to kill at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Judge Bradford sentenced Marcus Ashford to hang. The execution would be carried out in 30 days. Marcus's composure finally shattered. As guards dragged him from the courtroom, he screamed at Ellie. This is your fault. I loved you. You destroyed me. You destroyed everything. Jamie moved to shield Ellie from the sight from the words. She buried her face in his chest and tried not to hear. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them with questions. Robert ran interference while Jamie and Catherine hustled Ellie into a waiting carriage. They returned to the hotel in silence, each processing what had just occurred in their own way. That night, Ellie could not sleep. She stood at the window of her hotel room, looking out at Phoenix's dim lights, and wondered why she felt no triumph. Marcus would die for what he had done. Justice had been served. So why did she only feel hollow? A soft knock at the adjoining door. Jamie's voice. "Ellie, you awake?" She opened the door to find him still dressed, eyes tired. Couldn't sleep either. Keep thinking about how close it came. If that jury had believed his insanity claim, if they had decided you somehow brought this on yourself. But they didn't. No, they didn't. He entered the room, propriety abandoned in favor of comfort. "Are you all right? Really all right?" "I don't know. I thought I would feel relieved when it was over. Instead, I just feel sad. A man is going to die because he could not accept that I was not his to own. That seems like such a waste." Jamie pulled her into his arms. "It's a waste of his making, not yours. You did nothing wrong. You said no. That should have been enough." They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. Finally, Jamie pulled back enough to see her face. "Let's get married," he said. "We are getting married. I mean now, tomorrow, in Phoenix before we go back. I don't want to wait. I've spent too much of my life waiting for things that never came. You're here, I'm here. Let's not waste another day." Ellie felt something in her chest loosen, warmth spreading where hollowness had been. "Yes, tomorrow. Let's do it." When they were married the next afternoon in a small church with Robert and Catherine as witnesses and a handful of Phoenix citizens who had followed the trial and wanted to see the love story that had emerged from tragedy. Ellie wore a simple dress Catherine had purchased that morning. Jamie wore his best shirt and a new string tie that kept threatening to choke him. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jamie kissed her with a tenderness that made Ellie's eyes sting with happy tears. They were married. Against all odds, despite everything that had tried to tear them apart, they were married. The journey back to the Broken Arrow felt different. Ellie was no longer a guest, no longer a woman in need of rescue. She was Jamie Callahan's wife, and that simple fact changed everything. Catherine had prepared a celebration at the ranch, all the hands and their families turning out to wish the newlyweds well. There was music and dancing and food enough to feed an army. Ellie found herself swept into dances with ranch hands who handled her like she might break, congratulated by their wives who welcomed her as one of their own. As the sun set, Jamie spirited her away from the party. They rode to his line shack where everything had begun and spent their first night as husband and wife in the bed where Jamie had first nursed Ellie back to life. "Full circle," Ellie murmured as they lay tangled together afterward. "New circle," Jamie corrected. "This is just the beginning." 2 weeks later, Ellie started teaching in Silver Creek. The school was small, 15 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Some could barely read. Others had sharp minds, hungry for knowledge that had been denied them by circumstance and geography. Ellie threw herself into the work with a passion that surprised even her. She taught reading through newspapers and dime novels, math through practical ranching problems, calculating weights and measures and profit margins, science through the desert ecology that surrounded them, making the harsh landscape a classroom. The children responded to her methods with enthusiasm. Within a month, even the skeptical parents were singing her praises. That Eastern woman might not know cattle, but she surely knew how to teach. Jamie rode the 20 miles from the Broken Arrow every Friday evening, staying through Sunday. They made a home in the small teacher's cottage, learning the rhythms of married life. How Jamie took his coffee. How Ellie needed quiet in the mornings to gather her thoughts. The way they fit together like pieces of a puzzle neither had known was incomplete. In the spring of 1874, disaster struck the territory. The rains failed. Wells that had never run dry began to show bottom. Cattle died in the fields, their carcasses drawing buzzards that seemed to multiply by the day. Crops withered. People began to talk about leaving, about giving up on Arizona and trying their luck elsewhere. Silver Creek was hit hard. The town well dropped lower each week. Water had to be rationed, each family allotted a certain amount. It was not enough. Children cried from thirst. Tempers frayed as neighbors argued over who was taking more than their share. Ellie watched and remembered 3 days in the desert, the desperation for water. Remembered, too, the lessons Jamie had taught her during her recovery, how to read the land for signs of underground springs, how certain plants only grew where water could be found, how animals knew things humans had forgotten. At a town council meeting called to discuss whether Silver Creek could survive another month without rain, Ellie stood up. "I think I know where we can find water," she said. The men looked at her with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. One of them, the blacksmith, shook his head. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Callahan, but we've looked everywhere. There's no water to be found." "You've looked with logic," Ellie replied. "Let me look with what the desert taught me." They were desperate enough to let her try. The next morning, Ellie led a group of men to an area 3 miles from town that no one had considered. It looked like every other piece of desert rocks and sage and sand. But Ellie had noticed things. A particular type of willow growing in a depression, tracks showing deer congregating in one spot. The way the ground felt slightly different underfoot, holding moisture just a bit better. "Dig here," she said, pointing to a spot that looked no different from any other. The men exchanged glances but picked up shovels. 2 feet down, the sand was damp. 4 feet wet. 6 feet water began to seep in. By 8 feet, they had tapped into a spring that bubbled up clear and cold. The town celebrated like it was a second Christmas. Ellie Callahan, the Eastern teacher, had saved them. That night, Silver Creek held a dance in her honor. Jamie waltzed her around the town square, pride shining in his eyes. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "From you. You taught me to read the desert when you were teaching me how you survived out here. I taught you how to find water for one person. You found enough for a whole town. I had a good teacher." As they danced under the stars, Robert Hayes watched from the sidelines with Catherine. They had ridden in for the celebration, bringing news that would change everything. The next morning, Robert asked Jamie to take a walk with him. They headed out to the edge of town where the desert stretched away toward mountains purple in the distance. "Jamie, I'm getting old," Robert began, without preamble. "My joints ache in the mornings. Catherine wants to travel east, see her sister before it's too late, and I find myself wanting things other than work." "You're not old, sir. Old enough to know what I want. Which is why I'm offering you the position of ranch manager. Full authority over the Broken Arrow. Comes with a house on the property, salary twice what you're making now, and a stake in the ranch's profits." Jamie stopped walking. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. You've been running the place in all but name for 2 years now. The hands respect you. The work gets done, and this way Ellie can keep teaching. The house is only 10 miles from Silver Creek. You could make it work. I've never managed anything that big. You've been managing it already. This just makes it official." Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "Think about it. Talk to Ellie. But know that you're the only man I trust to take care of what Catherine and I have built." Jamie and Ellie discussed it long into the night. The responsibility was enormous. The Broken Arrow ran over 10,000 head of cattle, employed 30 hands, covered more territory than some eastern states. But it was also an opportunity neither had dreamed possible. "What do you want to do?" Ellie asked. "I want to say yes, but only if you're willing. The house is closer to Silver Creek than the line shack. I could teach 4 days a week instead of 3. Have more time at home." She took his hand. "I think we should do it. I think you're ready." Jamie accepted the next morning. Robert's relief was palpable. Within a month, they had moved into the manager's house, a solid structure of stone and timber with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen that made Ellie's eyes light up. It was the nicest place either of them had ever lived. Jamie threw himself into the work with characteristic intensity. He knew cattle and horses, knew the land and the men. What he did not know, he learned asking questions of Robert and of Hans, who had been working the Broken Arrow since before Jamie arrived. His leadership was quiet but effective. When he gave an order, men followed it because they trusted his judgment. In December of 1875, Ellie gave birth to their first child. Thomas Hayes Callahan came into the world screaming his displeasure at the cold air, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Jamie held his son for the first time and wept. Ellie, exhausted but glowing, watched her husband become a father and felt her heart expand to hold even more love than she had thought possible. "He's perfect," Jamie whispered, afraid to move for fear of breaking this fragile new life. "He is," Ellie agreed, "our little miracle." They named him Thomas after Jamie's father, with Hayes as a middle name in honor of the man who had given them both so much. Robert, when told, had to excuse himself from the room. Catherine found him on the porch wiping his eyes. "That boy thinks of you as the father he lost," Catherine said gently. "And now he's made you a grandfather in all but name." "I wish Margaret could have lived to see this," Robert said. "Wish she could have known them." "Perhaps she does. Perhaps she's watching and smiling." The years that followed were good ones. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to bright and curious and adored by every hand on the Broken Arrow. In 1878, Elizabeth Catherine Callahan arrived, blonde like her mother, with eyes that shifted between green and gray, depending on the light. She was quieter than Thomas, more bookish, content to sit for hours with a picture book even before she could read the words. Ellie continued teaching, though she focused more on the ranch children now. She established a small school right on the Broken Arrow, teaching not just the Callahan children but the sons and daughters of the Hands. Catherine helped when Ellie needed it, delighting in having young voices in the house again. In 1883, their third child was born. Samuel James Callahan Jr., named for his father, was different from his siblings from the start. More thoughtful, more internal. Where Thomas wanted to rope cattle and Elizabeth wanted to read stories, young Samuel wanted to understand how things worked. Why the windmill turned, how the telegraph carried messages, what made the stars move across the sky. Jamie's life had become something he never could have imagined that day he found Ellie in the desert. He was a husband, a father, a ranch manager, respected throughout the territory. The lonely cowboy who had kept everyone at arm's length was gone, replaced by a man embedded in family and community. In the autumn of 1885, Robert Hayes called Jamie and Ellie to his bedside. He was 67, had lived a full life, but the years were catching up. Dr. Porter had made it clear that Robert's heart was failing. "I'm not afraid," Robert told them, Catherine holding his hand. "I've had more blessings than any man deserves. But there are things that need saying." He looked at Jamie. "You're the son I never had, boy. Don't argue, it's true. When Margaret died, I thought that part of my heart died with her. But you brought it back, you and Ellie and those beautiful children. You made this old ranch into something more than land and cattle. You made it a home." "Sir, you don't have to." "Hush, and let me finish while I still can." Robert managed a weak smile. "The Broken Arrow is yours. Legally, officially, it's all been drawn up. Catherine will have the main house and an income for life, all provided for. But the ranch, the cattle, the land, it's yours, on one condition. Anything. The Broken Arrow stays in the Callahan family for at least 3 generations. You pass it to your children, they pass it to theirs. If it's sold before your grandchildren are grown, it reverts to the territory of Arizona for public use. I want this place to outlast us all. Want it to be a legacy, not just property." Jamie could barely speak around the lump in his throat. "I promise, I swear it." "I know you do, son. That's why I'm trusting you with it." Robert Hayes died peacefully that night, Catherine beside him, Ellie and Jamie in the room bearing witness to the end of a life well lived. The funeral drew people from across the territory, all who had known Robert as a fair boss, a generous neighbor, a good man. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had built beside the grave of his daughter, Margaret. Catherine stood dry-eyed through the service, but that night Ellie heard her crying and went to sit with her. "He loved you both so much," Catherine said. "Used to tell me Jamie reminded him of himself at that age. And you, dear Ellie, you reminded him of Margaret, bright and brave and determined to make the world better." "We'll take care of the Broken Arrow," Ellie promised. "We'll make him proud." "You already have." The years turned seasons, cycling through their eternal dance. Thomas grew into a capable young man, taking on more responsibility around the ranch. He had his father's quiet competence, his mother's intelligence. At 23, he married Sarah Mitchell, daughter of a neighboring rancher, in a ceremony that brought tears to Ellie's eyes. In the spring of 1901, Thomas and Sarah presented Jamie and Ellie with their first grandchild, Benjamin Hayes Callahan, named for the beloved Robert. Benjamin Hayes came into the world with a lusty cry that spoke of strength and health. Jamie held his grandson and saw the future stretching out before him. This was Robert's legacy. This was why the old man had insisted on 3 generations, so that children yet unborn would have the security of land and family and purpose. But fate, as it so often does, had cruel twists in store. The accident happened on a cold November morning in 1902. Thomas was working with a green horse, a young stallion with promise, but needing patient handling. Something spooked the animal, perhaps a rattlesnake in the brush, perhaps just the skittishness of youth. The horse reared, came down wrong, and Thomas hit the ground hard. He never woke up. Dr. Porter said the blow to his head had been fatal almost instantly. There had been nothing anyone could have done. Sarah, pregnant with their second child, went into premature labor from the shock. She delivered a stillborn daughter and never recovered. The fever took her 3 days later. Jamie and Ellie stood beside two fresh graves holding their grandson, who was now an orphan at just 18 months old. Elizabeth wept openly. Samuel had rushed home from university, face gray, with shock and grief. "We'll raise him," Ellie said, voice rough from her own tears. "Benjamin is ours now. We'll make sure he knows who his parents were, what they meant. We'll give him the love they would have given him." Jamie could only nod, throat too tight for words. He had survived so much. The death of his own parents. Years of loneliness, the desert's attempt to claim Ellie, Marcus Ashford's obsession. But losing his eldest son, his firstborn, the boy he had watched grow from baby to man that nearly broke him. Catherine, now in her 80s, held them all together. "This is what family does," she said firmly. "We endure, we remember, and we keep living because that's what those we've lost would want." So they endured. Benjamin became the light in their grief, darkened house, his laughter and curiosity, a daily reminder that life went on even when it felt impossible. They raised him as their own, telling him stories of his parents, making sure Thomas and Sarah lived on in memory, even as Benjamin made new memories with his grandparents. Elizabeth became a teacher, like her mother, establishing a formal school on the Broken Arrow that served children from 3 neighboring ranches. She had a gift for reaching even the most stubborn students' patience that seemed infinite. She never married, dedicating her life to education and to helping raise her nephew. Samuel Jr. surprised them all by becoming a professor of engineering at the University of California. His brilliant mind found opportunities that the ranch could not provide, but he visited often, and Benjamin adored his uncle's visits and the strange contraptions he would build. The years passed. Benjamin grew from toddler to boy to young man. He had his father's build and his mother's gentle nature, but those eyes were pure Ellie, green as spring grass after a rare desert rain. In 1918, the influenza epidemic that swept the world came to Arizona. It took the very young and the very old, and sometimes it took those who seemed strongest for no reason anyone could understand. It took Ellie. She fought it for 5 days, fever raging, lungs filling with fluid that no amount of Dr. Porter's medicines could clear. Jamie never left her side, holding her hand, talking to her, even when she could no longer respond. On the 5th day, as the sun set over the land they had built together, Ellie opened her eyes one last time. "I love you," she whispered with her last breath. "Thank you for finding me." "Thank you for letting me," Jamie whispered back. She was 73. They had been married 45 years. They buried her on the hill beside Robert and Catherine and Margaret and Thomas and Sarah, all the souls who had made the Broken Arrow more than just land. Jamie followed her 4 years later, his old heart finally giving out at 81. They laid him beside Ellie, and the inscription on their shared headstone read Eleanor Morgan, Callahan, and James Callahan. The Buzzards were patient, but love was faster. Their legacy lived on. The ranch prospered under Benjamin's management. He married in 1925 a school teacher named Grace, who reminded everyone of Ellie in her younger days. They had 4 children of their own, keeping the promise to Robert Hayes that the Broken Arrow would pass through 3 generations of Callahans. The drought of 1874 became legend, the story of how a Boston school teacher saved a town by reading the desert like a book. The tale of Jamie and Ellie's romance, born of buzzards and desperation and a cowboy who refused to let death win, was told and retold until it became part of the territory's folklore. But on this July evening in 1922, with Benjamin preparing to leave for military service, Jamie wanted his grandson to understand the truth behind the legend. They sat together on the porch as the last light left the sky, stars beginning to emerge like distant candles. Benjamin had been silent through the story, processing everything his grandfather had told him. "I never knew all that," Ben finally said, "about how you and grandmother met, about Marcus Ashford, about the trial and the siege and everything you both went through." "Your grandmother didn't like to talk about those dark times," Jamie explained. preferred to focus on what came after. But you needed to hear it, needed to understand. Why now? Why tonight? Jamie turned to face his grandson fully. Because tomorrow you're heading into your own kind of desert sun. Not sand and sun, but the unknown all the same. Service, duty, a world bigger than this ranch. And when you're out there, when it feels like the buzzards are circling and there's no way out, I need you to remember something. He put a weathered hand on Ben's shoulder. Your grandmother was left for dead in the desert. I was a lonely man with no family and no future. We both thought our stories were ending, but God had other plans, better plans than we could have imagined. I'm nervous, grandfather, Ben admitted, about leaving, about whether I'll measure up. I know. I was scared too every time I faced something bigger than myself. But fear doesn't make you a coward, Ben. Running from fear makes you a coward. You're not running, you're walking toward what scares you. That's courage. Jamie pulled his grandson into a fierce embrace. The buzzards don't get the final say. Death doesn't get the final say. You keep fighting, keep breathing, keep believing that there's something better just over the next rise. That's the lesson your grandmother taught me. That's what I'm teaching you. When they pulled apart, both had tears on their faces, but neither felt shame in it. Inside, Aunt Elizabeth called, "Benjamin, come say goodnight before bed." The young man stood, then paused. "Will you tell me more?" "When I come back, about all the years in between." "When you come back," Jamie agreed, "I'll tell you everything about building this ranch into what it is today, about all the small moments that make a life worth living. But you have to come back first." "I will. I promise." After Benjamin went inside, Jamie sat alone on the porch looking out at the desert he had called home for 49 years. Ellie had been gone 4 years now, and he still felt her absence like a missing limb, but he also felt her presence in everything around him, in the land she had helped him build, in the grandson they had raised together, in the legacy that would outlast them both. Tomorrow Benjamin would leave. In time he would return bringing his own stories, his own lessons learned. The cycle would continue. The broken arrow would endure. Jamie raised his glass of whiskey to the stars, to the woman who had saved his life just as surely as he had saved hers, and whispered into the vast Arizona night. "The buzzards were patient, my love, but we were faster." The story could have ended in that desert in 1873. A woman dying buzzards circling the sun, merciless and uncaring. But a cowboy happened to ride past at exactly the right moment, guided by instinct or providence or simple chance. He chose to stop, chose to care, chose to fight for a stranger's life. And from that choice, from that moment of compassion in a harsh land, came a love that shaped generations. Came children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Came a family rooted in the very soil that had nearly become Eleanor's grave. The Broken Arrow Ranch still stands today, testament to Robert Hayes' vision, Jamie Callahan's stewardship, and Eleanor Morgan's courage. But more than a ranch, it stands as proof that from disaster can come blessing, from near death can come vibrant life, and that sometimes the path to everything you never knew you wanted begins with 3 days dying and a stranger who refuses to let the desert win. The buzzards were patient that day in July 1873. They always are. But this time patience was not enough. This time a cowboy rode faster.